And it is Friday. It's a nice little bonus here, so let's get into it. We are going live right now. Let's get everything situated here. But man, first off, I do want to apologize to you because we should have been recording Wednesday. You should be out enjoying your weekend, but instead you're in here grinding to the bone, ready to talk some Miami Dolphins football.
Hey man, life happens. You were under the weather. That it happens to us all. So uh, no sweat off my back. We're here on a Friday. We're ready to entertain the masses. Talking about our Miami Dolphins. So excited for it. Both of us got fresh cuts today. You can't see it under our hats, but it's almost like we coordinated that to make sure we were looking good for these people too.
It's pretty impressive too if you get a haircut just to put a hat back on. Dude, but I was a big old adult today. I went to the dentist, I went to the bank, I got a haircut, and so I am ready just to kind of pump the brakes and talk about something pretty interesting.
I also went to the bank today. As I was depositing some checks, a lot of checks actually, the ATM just shut down. It like it just shut off. Screen went black. My card got locked in the machine. All the
Oh
checks got
no.
locked in the machine. I had to get out of my vehicle, still in the ATM lane, walk inside and be like, all my stuff's locked in your machine. I promise you it's there. I'm not trying to steal money from you, but they were able to get it all figured out and situated. But I was like, yes, of course, of course. Why me? It has to happen to me, doesn't it?
I
But we're here. We made it.
I think we should start an ATM business where all of them just do that and we just get all
Yeah,
the money. It
and we
sounds
just we
foolproof.
we're like, yeah, there's no proof. We can't figure it out. It's in there, but it might
The
be yours,
person
might not be.
the person right before you just broke the camera on the ATM, so I
Mm.
don't know what to tell you. We got no proof. I think you're just SOL here.
Now, back in my day, let me put on my old man hat. Back in my day, there was a human being on the other side of that, and you just stuck it in a tube and it went all the way through there. And now I'm dealing with some sort of robot teller, and they don't know what they're doing.
You lost
AI.
your tubes? We still at least had tubes. We got
we don't
both.
we
No
don't have
tubes?
tubes anymore. No tubes
Oh
in Iowa.
no!
Tubes have been tied.
Tubeless Iowa. That's what we're gonna start calling you
Nope.
guys from now
Nope.
on.
Everything's robotic now. If you go to, I don't know if you guys probably don't have this fast food joint. We call it Checkers here, but in the South they call it Rallies, Checkers and
Yeah.
Rallies. You can't talk to a human being anymore at the drive-through. You order through a robot. It speaks back to you eloquently. It's nice. They're polite, probably more polite than the person working the window would have
Better
been.
breath too.
But yeah, you don't order from a human being anymore. You order from a robot. This time is passing me by.
I do have to say I do like ordering ahead with those places just so I'm not sitting there staring at like this menu and neon lights, just seeing my eyes glaze over 40 burgers that look exactly the same. But I like a fallback of having a person that you can just say, "Hey, help me!" Yell, speak to a representative
Yes.
so many times until someone comes up.
I need a human. It's all well and good until you have to like customize your burger, and then the robot just falls apart.
It can't handle it. I don't know. I don't know what light onions actually means. But
Yeah.
all right, Merrick, we're diving into it. We've done this down to the details series. We are actually putting together a pretty interesting project. We're mapping out the entire Miami Dolphins depth chart. Today, it's all about the tight ends. And during these shows, we are here to answer four specific questions. Where do things stand with the position group? What makes them good? What needs to happen this offseason? And what does success look like on the field? And Merrick, you're a pretty unique person to talk about this. You have a relationship with one of the better tight ends in the league, and it just so happens to be a tight end that we love to talk about. I mean, Elijah Higgins, the Miami Dolphins sixth-round pick, was asked, I think it was during the rookie mini camps last weekend, who are you trying to learn from? What type of tight end are you trying to be? And instantly everyone goes George Kittle. It seems like this fan base, it seems like everyone around any, I don't know, Kyle Shanahan disciple seems to feel like you need a George Kittle to make an offense really hum the way it should.
Yeah, George Kittle's a friend of mine. He went to the University of Iowa, and one of his college teammates, I'll give him a shout out here. His name was Steve Manders. He was the fullback on that Iowa Hawkeye football team. He actually came to my wrestling school, Steve did, and learned how to be a professional wrestler from myself and my business partner,
Okay,
Seth
cool.
Rollins. So, George, being a huge wrestling fan as he is, decided to come visit Steve one day when he was at our gym and asked if he could get in the ring. So I met him that day. This was right before he got drafted into the NFL. So he got in the ring. I showed him how to do a couple moves in the ring for the first time. He was like, man, like a kid in a candy shop. He was just living his best life that day. and we became good friends with him, and he's good friends with Seth as well. So we've hung out together in New Orleans for WrestleMania, and out at a couple different spots for WrestleMania. Always seems to be wrestling involved, and we'll text back and forth occasionally about wrestling, and I'll try and get some football knowledge out of him, but he's a little tight-lipped when it comes to stuff like that.
Fair.
Yeah, which you can't blame him too much for that. But yeah, I do have a unique perspective because, like you said, a lot of these guys on the Dolphins roster get, I don't want to say compared to George Kittle, but people want them to be George Kittle so bad. And I mean, George Kittle, like you said, one of the best tight ends in the NFL today. I think every fan base wants a George Kittle on their team, but even more so with the Dolphins because we got that Kyle Shanahan system, that Mike McDaniel system coming over from San Francisco to Miami. So we have been looking for our George Kittle. Last year Mike Gesicki was studying George Kittle tape, and we saw how that turned out. Not so well for Mike Gesicki, but he's off in Patriot land now, so we won't worry about him too much. But if Elijah Higgins can study his George Kittle tape and then replicate it a little bit, then we may be in business. But that's a pretty tall task. There's only one George Kittle. If we can get someone who's close to him, I think we'll be in business there.
Yeah, and I do wonder if our view or optics on focused on the tight end room is a little warped just for the sake of that. I mean, if Mike Gesicki was like a paid like Durham Smythe, I think he just signed a new contract, but before that it was like 2 years, $12 million ish. If Mike Gesicki was on a deal like that, not making that 12 million in 1 year, I think we'd have a different tone about that season. I think we'd see the 350 yards and 5 touchdowns he had as like pocket change you found in the couch. Things like, all right, this is like pretty cool. This is good to have. It's a fun player. We get to see him gritty, but just the idea of the franchise tag, the idea of his inability to block has always chased him around, really just set up a disadvantage of our expectations and what we really wanted at that tight end room. Before we get into what the Dolphins have, Marek, I just want to share this Scott Barrett tweet. Tight end seasons by yards per reception, yards per route run since 2009. Gronk is first at 3.2 yards per route run. George Kittle has 3 of the next 4 marks all time. That is how much of a maniac this man is. He is the definition of playing with their hair on fire. If you look it up in the dictionary, it's just a picture of him. The Dolphins don't need that. We'd love it. It'd be fantastic. But I don't think that's what this offense needs to reach its peak, strictly because, man, Gronk, George Kittle, Mark Andrews, and then 2 more George Kittles. It's not easy to find these type of players. So I just kind of like to switch the perspective a little bit because I don't think we need him to do what George Kittle is doing in San Fran. I think he has 2 or 3 seasons where they'd be the best seasons all time for the entire Miami Dolphins tight end room, all the guys put together. So I think the expectations are so high. I don't want to go as far as to say it's like, is Ryan Tannehill going to be the next Dan Marino? Is Charles Harris going to be the next Jason Taylor? But I kind of get that vibe of maybe the expectations are a little too high for what we need and what we want at the position.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, the names you listed off there, Rob Gronkowski, Mark Andrews, George Kittle, those offenses run through those players. There's good players, other good players offensively on all of those teams, but those tight ends make those offenses hum, outside of the quarterback position. That's not what's going to happen in Miami. Miami has Tyreek Hill. Miami has Jalen Waddle. The offense, as long as those two guys are suiting up in the aqua and orange, the offense is going to run through Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. You need your tight end to be a complementary piece. And honestly, you need your tight end to be a good blocker. Mike Gesicki was not he was not a good blocker. That was not him. That's not his identity. He's more of a big bodied wide receiver, and he's going to get to do that in New England. But in Miami, they want tight ends who can block and can also catch passes when needed, but that's not their main focal point. So now you got Durham Smythe, who's going to get more playing time. They signed Eric Saubert, who can do a little bit of both. They signed Tyler Kroft, who can do a little bit of both. And then they have some projects in Tanner Connor and Elijah Higgins. So I think they're pretty set in the tight end room right now. I don't think they'll be making any more additions, but what this room is going to look like is yet to be seen. We'll have to see it all play out on the field because there's a lot of new bodies with only the only real incumbent being Durham Smythe. I know Tanner Connor was here last year, but very, very limited playing time. Exactly. Very limited playing time and very little production when he was on the field. So there's a lot to be figured out in that tight end room, but I do feel like there have been upgrades in the additions that have been brought in, namely because of their blocking ability. And I'm sure we're about to get into that.
Yeah, and the NFL kind of went through, I don't want to say an identity crisis, but kind of look in the mirror a little bit. I mean, I don't think anybody expected Mike Gesicki's deal to be as cheap as it was. Dalton Schultz, the other contending tight end for that prize of free agency, he signed a 1-year deal with almost identical money with the Houston Texans. So that demand, that expectation we had wasn't there. And just to kind of go to your context of it's a Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill team, Mike Gesicki was targeted once in 5 different games last year, and not once did we gripe like he's not involved enough. He lined up in the slot 50% of the time. Again, we're not complaining that he's not blocking enough. So we do see that there is an opportunity here for a tight end to develop. Durham Smythe last year, Marek, he played inline 74% of the time. That was the most since 90% of the time as a rookie. He targeted 11 times. He caught 8 of those passes. I don't think that's going to tell us much. The way a tight end gets catches in a Miami Dolphins Mike McDaniel scheme is just opportunities. You're not going to scheme it. You're not going to build the offense around him. It's just how you react to the defense. But something I do want to touch on when we talk about Durham Smythe, and I don't want to love having him on the team, but everyone was under the impression that if Mike Gesicki is your receiving tight end, Durham Smythe is your blocking tight end. Durham Smythe wasn't the greatest blocker last year. He led the team in sacks allowed with 3. I think he was tied with one other player on that. He had 9 pressures as a blocker. So this idea that, we desperately need that blocking tight end, while it might be true, I don't think this offense is necessarily going to drown because we are still searching for that blocking tight end, despite Durham Smythe being that safe, sound Anthony Fasano, maybe not great at anything, but pretty solid at everything type guy.
Yeah, and I think it's less of needing a blocking tight end and more so needing a tight end who can do a little bit of both, right?
Exactly.
Where you need somebody who, when you put them on the field, you're not telegraphing what your offense is going to do. And with Mike Gesicki, everybody knew that when Mike Gesicki was on the field, they were going to throw the ball 90% of the time. So you were able to play the odds there and get matched up defensively the way you wanted to do it. If you put somebody on the field like an Eric Sauber or a Tyler Croft who can block, but can also make the opportune catches, they're not, again, they're not Gronkowski, they're not Kittle, they're not Andrews, they're not going to put up these gaudy numbers, but they, when given the opportunity, can make a play, then you're guessing a little bit more. So everyone's looking at this Dolphins tight end room and saying that Durham Smythe is the de facto number 1 tight end. That might not be the case. Just because he got the extension doesn't mean that he's necessarily going to be the tight end 1, at least through the duration of the season, maybe to start out with while the other guys are learning the offense a little bit more. Although Tyler Croft does come from a couple offenses very similar to what Mike McDaniel is going to run this year. But Durham Smythe might start the year out as tight end 1, but I wouldn't be surprised if he gets surpassed by a Saubert or a Tyler Croft as the year moves on.
With New York, Tyler Croft, he was with San Fran last year, but before that, he was with the Jets, and they even ran if you kind of squint your eyes, it's along the same lines of the Mike McDaniel offense.
The LaFleur offense, yeah.
Exactly. And then in San Francisco last year is where I started to get a little interested in what Tyler Croft brings to the table. He was lined up in line, aka with the offensive lineman, 77% of the time for 192 snaps. He didn't allow a sack. In more than 800 snaps over the past 4 years, where most of that time has been spent in this offense, he didn't allow a sack. So right there, you're like, all of a sudden, Tyler Croft is a little interesting. He was targeted 6 times with 4 receptions. You're not going to peg him with the ball over and over, but you want someone who, we're going to throw it to you. The idea is you're going to catch it. It's that simple. We're not going to throw it to you unless you're open and you have an opportunity to make a play. But Marek, you mentioned him a little bit. Eric Saubert. This is my wild card. This is my player who I think could leapfrog that entire tight end room. 6'5", 253 pounds. He hasn't had it easy dealing with different offenses. Atlanta, Chicago, Jacksonville, before 2 years in Denver. He caught 15 of 23 targets last year, but flexibility. He was in the slot 40% of the time, in line 54% of the time. He didn't allow a sack in 192 blocking snaps. Now we can look at you're signing this guy in the middle of free agency. He was with the Denver Broncos. That offense stunk. But when you look around the edges and specific traits or skills or even stats you're interested in, hearing that not only did he line up relatively close to 50-50, but not allowing a sack when he was supposed to be that inline guy, that's it, man. That's the opportunity. That's that confusion you give to defenses where he's lining up. you still can't have any indication of where that play might go. I think he might be that guy.
Yeah, and to your point there, he was signed pretty early on in free agency. He seemed like a guy they were targeting, and probably for that reason that you can put him on the field, you can line him up in line, you can line him up, kind of split out, you can line him up wide if you'd like to, and you're not 100% sure exactly what the offense is doing there. Are they running the ball? Are they throwing the ball? We're not sure because he's, like you said, pretty close to a 50-50 split there between blocking and going out to catch passes. So they targeted him pretty early on, and I'll be interested to see what his role is once training camp starts. See if we can get some of these little nuggets sprinkled in, some of these breadcrumbs. See if we can follow the trail back to possibly Eric Saubert being a heavily involved member of this Miami Dolphins offense in 2023.
And the offensive numbers, I didn't even list them because they're not that impressive, but that Denver offense was pretty ugly last year, so I don't want to even use that as context. But just seeing how other teams are comfortable lining them up in different spots, that's the key for me. Marek, we mentioned him a little earlier, but Elijah Higgins drafted in the 6th round. I think before I mention any of his stats, anything like that, I think it's important to keep in mind tight end might be one of the toughest positions in terms of plug and play. I don't think it's very easy for someone to come into the league. The amount of terminology you need to learn so many blocking sets, you need to learn receiving sets. I just wanted to pump the brakes a little bit because I'm interested in Elijah Higgins as a prospect, but it's important to keep in mind he's a prospect, a 6th round prospect where maybe what is your ceiling for him? I mean, you'd hope he can land on the practice squad, but where would you say that ceiling is?
Yeah, I'm not expecting a lot out of Higgins this year, at least in 2023. The last wide receiver to tight end convert was Tanner Connor last year, and like we already
Yep.
talked about, we didn't see a lot from him last year. He made the team, which was a surprise. He had a roster spot throughout the year, which was a surprise. Not even relegated to the practice squad, but when he was called into action, he had some hiccups. He wasn't really ready for NFL action. Now, Higgins does come from Stanford, which is a Division One school, so maybe he's a little bit more prepared than Connor was. But he is again essentially learning a new position. And like you said, one of the tougher positions to pick up when you're entering the league as a young rookie. So I'm expecting, while maybe not a full redshirt year, something pretty close to that. Not a lot of action, maybe. Especially with this offense being, or with this team being better than it has been in years past, not a lot of room for developmental guys on the 53. So I am thinking it's probably a practice squad year for Higgins, and we'll see if there's anything more than that.
It's another attempt for the Miami Dolphins. It's quickly turning into one of their themes, taking a stab at turning a big wide receiver into a tight end, right? That's just the situation they want to go in. Those are the type of players they're looking for. He even said himself that he played the big slot in college, was a blocker 35% of his snaps. But on those 35% of his snaps, only 24 of them were inline. So to me, right there, the indication I have with someone like Elijah Higgins, where if we wanted to say his ceiling this year, Trent Sherfield was an awesome downfield blocker last year. Elijah Higgins, 6'3", 235 pounds, is used to being a blocker despite being lined up out wide, being out there in the middle of the ocean, having to connect with whatever is out there and just defer them just a little bit. So to me, that's kind of where I'm a little interested. If they're starting to set up plays maybe down the field, obviously you don't want to put the cart in front of the horse and say, hey, we're going to make this play where when you're 30 yards down the field, we're going to lateral 4 times and make it work. But to me, that's kind of his strength there. And then on top of that, he caught 59 of 82 targets, 704 yards and 2 touchdowns, 1.83 yards per route run, 0 pressures, 1 penalty. Very sound guy, very clean resume. I think it's a very safe pick in the 6th round. And Marek, as you see this group shaking out, there's a lot of would you, shoulda, you coulda, but are you comfortable with this group?
I guess I'm as comfortable as I can be. There's no real superstar of the group. There's no real guy that you can get super excited about. But for what they're going to be asked to do, I do think there were some upgrades and some additions that'll make sense for this team. I think Saubert and Croft add that blocking element that was missing from Mike Gesicki's game. And I think they're going to be big body targets in the red zone, combined with Higgins, combined with Smythe. I think it's a solid group. It's not one of the strongest position groups on the team. Nobody's going to come out here and tell you that. But there's room for growth. There's room for improvement. And you got a bunch of guys, veteran guys too. Smythe's been in the league a long time. Saubert's been in the league 5 seasons. Croft's been in the league 8 seasons. Like, there's guys who have played meaningful snaps in the NFL on this unit. They're not relying on a rookie to come out and like we've talked about a couple times now, that tight end position is difficult to learn when you first get into the NFL. So to put all your eggs in that rookie tight end basket, that could be a recipe for disaster. And the Dolphins avoided that this year by taking their project wide receiver 2 tight end convert in Higgins. So you're not really expecting a ton from him. But the other 3 guys in Smythe, Saubert, and Croft, those guys add a veteran presence to the room, and they're just going to be lunch pail dudes. They're going to go out there, they're going to get their job done. Yep, and they're not going to have those high expectations on them like Gesicki had last year.
I don't want this to be portrayed the wrong way, but is there a position group on the Miami Dolphins that's maybe weaker than tight end? Because I kind of want to argue there isn't.
Maybe not position group. I think the offensive line is the other part of this team that people get a little nervous, a little bit worried about. But you do have some stalwarts on that line in Teron Armstead at left tackle, Connor Williams at center, and even Robert Hunt at right guard.
Mm-hmm.
The left guard and the right tackle positions have people feeling Joe Philbin queasy. So whereas 3 of 5 spots are solidified on that offensive line, I don't know if any spots are solidified in this tight end room, even with Durham Smythe getting that extension. I think we as fans maybe have to come to terms with the fact that Mike McDaniel and the rest of the Miami Dolphins front office likes Durham Smythe more than we do. You know what I mean? Like, we see Durham Smythe and we go, oh, that's not a George Kittle. That's not a Travis Kelce. That's not a Mark Andrews. We need to upgrade that position. Well, most teams don't have those players. In fact, only 3 teams do. So if Mike McDaniel, who is a genius, at offensive football, like we've kind of all agreed upon at this point, if Mike McDaniel likes Durham Smythe, then he's good enough for me,
And think about it this way. Let's say that each position group is a character from Charlie Brown, and they're going out on Halloween trying to get some candy. Even on the offensive line, you open up that bag, you got a Teron Armstead Snickers bar, you got a Robert Hunt M&Ms. When you open the bag of that tight end group, I got a rock. This is just a flat out rock, and you kind of got to be okay with that rock in this scenario. And I think, the offense can make a rock work. I think that's too one of the reasons you pay someone like Mike McDaniel to come in, because you can't pay every receiver, you can't pay every offensive line and every quarterback. You got to make some rocks work, and I think McDaniel can do that here.
What type of candy is Austin Jackson? That's what I want to know. What's a candy you don't, maybe you used to like it, but you don't like it, or you gave it a shot, you tried to like it, but now you're just over it. I don't want this candy ever again. Or just a candy that you flat out hate. Like most Dolphins fans hate Austin Jackson.
I kind of wanted to go with like a Milky Way, because you read the text on the wrapper, you're like, oh, caramel, chocolate, this sounds really good. And it's appealing every time you look at it. But then you take a bite in and you're like, I should just went like a Snickers, a Take 5 or something, because the advertising is this is not what I bought. This tastes like a knockoff version.
Not a big fan of Milky Ways. What about Tootsie Rolls? I hate Tootsie Rolls. I've always hated Tootsie Rolls. Even as a little kid, all the other little kids are going crazy for the Tootsie Rolls. I'm like, these suck. Have you guys ever had a Butterfinger?
That's another one that just gets stuck in your teeth. Hot take, Milk Duds. Milk Duds are another one that's on the surface sound great, then just are kind of miserable the second you start eating them.
I feel that.
So yeah, we had settled the tight end group is we're settling with rocks here. But Marek, you kind of touched on it a little bit. What makes this group good? It's a lot of guys the Dolphins can trust. There is going to be no fear dictating the offensive play calling. There's going to be no fear dictating we can't have a tight end all low and on an island. Out of those 3 guys, do you still think going into training camp, Smythe is that constant, front runner going to be the guy until someone else proves otherwise? Or do you think there's an opportunity for a Croft or a Saubert to really hit the ground running just with this offense and what they're trying to accomplish?
I do think Smythe will probably be tight end 1 to start out with, just because he has a year with Mike McDaniel, and Mike McDaniel seems like a pretty loyal dude.
Yeah,
So I think he'll start out as that tight end one, but I really like the addition of Tyler Kroft. I just keep thinking about 8 years in the league, experience in San Francisco, experience with the Jets in a similar offensive system, a really good blocker, like you said, didn't give up a sack in like 800 pass block reps. You said
crazy.
that's really good. That's a lot better than we've had in the past. And I can see him lining up outside Austin Jackson, and both of those guys can double team a block and maybe actually, give our quarterback time to throw for the first time in a while, even though Tua gets the ball out pretty quick. I don't think he needs a ton of time to throw, but it'd be cool if he could, stay healthy for a full 17 game season. Who knows what would happen if that were the case. But I just keep coming back to Tyler Kroft, and I feel like we're going to see him play a pretty significant role for the Dolphins in that tight end room this year. And I think it'll be a pretty even split between all three of those guys once it's said and done: Saubert, Kroft, and Smythe.
And when we start thinking about what needs to happen this offseason, what needs to happen in training camp, I think you kind of just hit it. It's about developing that identity, understanding what these guys are peak at, what is the exact thing that they do the best. And on top of that, there are going to be some targets available. Do you think those 50 Mike Gesicki targets from last year are going to stick with that tight end room? Personally, I'm going to say I think they go to the running back room a little bit more, but
I'd
I
like
would like to
that.
hear your thoughts.
No, I would love that. I've been begging. I was last year at least, and I'll continue to beg until we see it. But I've been begging for this offense to implement the screen game a little bit more. Screens to
Absolutely.
you to your receivers, screens to your running backs out of the backfield, some swing routes, some dump offs, some Texas routes. I feel like this team is so fast that you don't always have to be looking for that chunk play. Tua led
Mhm.
the league in those intermediate throws last year, 10 yards plus down the field. And while that was great, opposing defenses started to figure it out towards the end of the year, towards the end of Tua's year specifically. So a way you can keep them honest, especially if they're going to play so far off the line of scrimmage to contain the speed of Hill and Waddle, a way you keep that honest is by running those screen routes. So I do think you could see a lot more passes to these running backs, maybe mitigating the role of the tight end even further in the Dolphins offense. But I think where their bread is going to be buttered is in that run game, in that pass protection game as blockers. And I think they've been very intentional with that this offseason. I think if you read between the lines, the Dolphins are telling you we want our tight ends to block and not do a whole lot more than that.
Shake that crystal ball. If I had set the over under at the leading tight end on the Miami Dolphins will have over under 28 and a half targets, what would you pick?
Targets or receptions?
We're going to go targets.
Targets.
Mike Gesicki had like 36 receptions on 50 targets. That just kind
No.
of that speaks to like the pace and the timing of the offense and how there was just that little disconnect there. But
Yeah.
so that's why I kind of want to stick with targets just for this.
Yeah, I'll definitely take the under on that. I think they want all three guys to rotate in and out. The top three there, I think they want them to rotate in and out. I don't, like I said, I don't think they're going to be a big focal point of the passing game. I think they're going to block their asses off, and I think they're going to do a pretty darn good job of that. And I think that's by design. And you can also go with the fact that they didn't make a lot of splashy additions to that offensive line room, even though they signed Isaiah Wynn and Cedric Agwehi.
Beautiful. Killed it. You didn't even
Boom.
look at the my cheat sheet. Look at you.
Even though they signed those guys last week, I think they're really going to ask these tight ends to block a little bit more, catch a little bit less, and let this offense continue to funnel through Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle.
Yeah, I think it boils down to that the targets are going to be less, but I do think like even if he Mike Gesicki, like what we're talking like 20 balls that fell incomplete between roughly rough math there, it's going to be a lot tighter on that. Where you had Durham Smythe, what 16, 19 targets, 15 receptions, four incomplete passes. Let me see here, Tyler Kroft. 6 targets, 4 receptions. You're going to have that high effective rate in terms of just making sure their passes they can catch. Last year, Mike Gesicki lined up in the slot 50% of the time. Does any tight end go above 30% of the time?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's what they want to do. And I also think when you draft a guy like Devon A. Chain, And he's already said so himself in some of these rookie practices. They got him lined up as a slot receiver quite a bit. That's exciting. Can you imagine that? What if they went 4 quote unquote receiver sets with Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Chosen Anderson, which I think I just recently heard he actually wants to go by Robbie Chosen now, which
Too
what
much
is that?
choosing. Too
This
much
is yes,
choosing.
yeah. Just choose. Just no more. Just choose and stick with it. Because he wants Chosen on the back of his jersey, which is kind of cool. But anyways, you got Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Robbie Chosen, and Devon Achane all lined up like that, and you gotta contain that speed. That's mind blowing right there. That's really exciting to think about. So yeah, I do think the tight ends are going to be used as more traditional tight ends. They're going to be in line. They're going to be asked to block. McDaniel himself has said he wants to commit to running the ball a little bit more. You need tight ends who can block to be able to do that effectively in a wide zone scheme. So you went out and you got a couple to add to Durham Smythe there. So I really think they are telling us who they want to be. Now it's just on us to believe them.
And two, you're looking for that offensive output. George Kittle last year in line for 600 of his 857 snaps, right? You can still have success. One thing I want to get your thoughts on, I might have said this before, and you might have even pushed back. If you're talking about A-Chain lining up in the slot, and maybe not a tight end as often, I want to put out there a little on my radar that I don't know if Braxton Berrios' impact on this team is going to be as high as we once thought, because you just mentioned it too. If Trent Sherfield's gone, if Mike Gesicki are gone, your 2 slot guys, who's going to replace them? You instantly went running back, not one of the slot guys the Dolphins brought in. And to me, that's interesting. You're blocking downfield like we were talking about with someone like Elijah Higgins. Where do you see maybe those slot snaps going? Because, yes, I love the idea of Braxton Berrios. We've raved about him. I think he can have success in this offense. But I think when we're reading between the lines again and we're looking at the vision of this offense, I don't know if he's going to be that designated slot receiver that we think he might be.
There's a lot of options there. We talked Devon Achane. We talked Chosen Anderson, Robbie Chosen, Robbie Anderson, whatever you want to call him. We talked
Onion
him.
Head said.
You're talking Braxton Berrios right now. One guy we never bring up is Cedric Wilson. He's still on this team. He hasn't been traded yet. We all thought he was going to be a goner come draft day, and he'd be out of here, but he's not. He's still on this team, and he's still making what, $7 million a year, maybe a little bit more than that. So he's still an option in the slot as well. They have a lot of options. Last year's rookie Eric Ezukamba, he's on this team. Where does he slot in, pun intended? There's a lot of options here, and it's going to be exciting, fun, interesting to see where it shakes out. And you could see some pretty creative packages for some of these guys, and a little bit of misdirection, a little bit of sleight of hand. Just when you think you got it figured out, in comes Braxton Berrios, and all of a sudden he's running that drag route, catching it, and turning it upfield for a solid gain. Like, that's fun, that's exciting. When you give someone like Mike McDaniel, an offensive genius, an offensive mastermind, you give him all these toys to play with, all these tools at his disposal, then he's able to build this, master machine on offense, like I think he's going to do with the Dolphins this year. A lot of it comes down to health. We say it every time. There's always that caveat. But if Tua stays healthy, this offense, which was a top 5 offense, top 6 offense when he was healthy last year, this could really be a top 2 or 3 offense in the NFL, combined with the additions on defense and Vic Fangio as defensive coordinator. This will be, again, health permitting, the best Miami Dolphins team of our lifetime, and it might not even be that close.
Yeah, you just jinxed the living hell out of it. We are absolutely doomed. But one final note here before we wrap up. When we look back to last year, there are a lot of stats we can grab out of the air, and we're pretty hyped about, right? Tua leading the league in yards per attempt, Jalen Waddle leading the league in yards per reception, Tyreek Hill being second in both receptions and yards as a receiver. Both Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert were top 15 in yards per carry. But the one that is the most unbelievable to me, with everything we know about this team, everything we know about Mike McDaniel, how much they struggled with yak. This team was one of the worst when it comes to yak. And to me, if you want to fix that weakness, if that's the one issue that you think could maybe move the Miami Dolphins forward in terms of the passing game, it's that. It's getting those tight ends out there down the field and making sure they're not floating there like buoys and everyone can just kind of swerve around them, making sure they can just make contact and being those guys to clear the way for Tyreek Hill, clear the way for Jalen Waddle. I go back to that Green Bay game, man. Part of what made that Jalen Waddle drag over the middle and then he cut up the sideline. I mean, Tyreek Hill was escorting him all the way down the field. I think he pushed someone out of the way. I'm not going to deny that Jalen Waddle probably could have gotten away from him, but the fact you have someone out there blocking, I think, is just so important. And the Dolphins lacked that a lot of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's just so many options, so many bodies on this offense, so many fast dudes, experienced dudes, and players want to come play in Miami. You saw Isaiah Wynn say that last week in his introductory presser. He said, Miami's building something special. Who wouldn't want to be a part of it? And that's the truth. This is going to be a good football team. The Dolphins are going to be a good football team. Now they have a tough schedule. It's a tough division. We'll see how it all shakes out. And again, a lot of it rides on the health of the team, in particular, the health of the quarterback. But if they do stay healthy, I do see them making the playoffs. I do see them winning a playoff game for the first time in 20 plus seasons. And who knows what happens beyond that, beyond our wildest dreams of finally winning a playoff game. I think the last time I was either in 8th grade or a freshman in high school. And now I'm about to turn 37 years old, just about a month from now. So it's wild.
My highlights were Brian Hartline. I mean, what else do you need me to tell you? But Marek, I can't believe it. We just tacked on 35 minutes about the tight ends. Anything you want to promote? Anything you're working on, either for the Finsider or anything on your own? I mean, we saw Preston Williams got released. I plan on writing a little bit about that. Another acorn that didn't get enough water and just was left by the wayside. But kind of a slow time.
Yeah, we're just foraging for acorns right now. Not only are the Dolphins looking for those acorns that might have slipped through the cracks, but us as Dolphins reporters are doing the same thing. So anytime something a little bit newsworthy pops up on the Twitter, we try to claim it real quick and write a story. So I'm sure I'll have some fun ones coming up on the Finsider, later this week and into, actually it's already late this week. So probably next week. And then, somebody in the comments will say, this is not news. Don't write about this. And I'm like, what do you want me to write about? Because they didn't play a game on Sunday. I'm not sure if you noticed that, but there's not a lot happening and we still have quotas to meet. So
exactly. And one final point on that, if you want us to talk about something, if you're interested, everyone, you're watching us on YouTube, thank you for joining in. Everyone on Twitter, thank you for joining in. You can find us both there. Let us know what you think of the show. Let us know what you think is news and what we should be talking about it. But Marek, happy Friday. It was a blast talking with you. And until next time, fins up.
Fins up.